a lot of people think, well, my mom's not eating very well. I don't know why she can't just, quote, make a sandwich. Have you ever stopped and thought about how many steps are involved in just making a sandwich? You know, there's what bread, what meat, what condiments. You got to cut it. You know, you're going to toast the bread. I mean, there's 20 different questions just for a sandwich. So, simplifying everything that you can so that they can make choices.
Hey, y'all, this is Kosta, and today I'm here with my guest, Jennifer Fink, host of Fading Memories, a podcast designed to offer hope, advice, and wisdom from Alzheimer's caregivers who have lived the experience and thrived. Today, we're talking about how to navigate Alzheimer's without fear. So, Jennifer, will you tell us about your background and how you became a caregiver for your mother, Diana?
Certainly. Well, thank you for having me on the show. So, my mom had early onset Alzheimer's, which is generally somebody who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's before the age of 65. Now, officially, she was not diagnosed before 65, because she refused to do the testing that would have given them that definite diagnosis. By the time she was diagnosed, the whole family, including my daughter, who was 16 at the time, we were like, duh. It's like, I don't think you need a medical degree to realize what's going on. Her mom had vascular dementia, and her grandmother, so my maternal great-grandmother, also had what they called back in the day senile dementia. She died before I was born, but I've heard stories about Tupperware bowls full of water set on the stove to boil. That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah, so my dad passed away in March 2017. He assumed that she would come live with me. He had been in and out of the hospital. Well, he'd been in the hospital for 32 days, and during that time, my mom was bounced around between my home, my sister's home, and her sister taking care of her in her own home, which is terrible for somebody with a cognitive problem because, have you ever woken up and you're like, where the heck am I? I did that once when I flew to Toronto, and we got to Toronto at 3 a.m. When I woke up the next day, it was like, where am I? What time is it? What are we doing?
How did I get here?
Yeah, wait a minute. But of course, the fog clears, you have some caffeine and all as well, but
sure.
That obviously is not the case with somebody with advanced Alzheimer's. And when she was in my home, it became painfully obvious that having her in my house was absolutely not the right choice because my husband and I are self-employed. I worked from home. I've worked from home since 2005, almost over at this point.
Wow.
And she wanted to sit around and shoot the breeze. And if you're trying to work, you can't do that. So I knew we'd have to hire a caregiver to come in during the day. My daughter, who was 25 at the time, moved out a month before my dad died. And I was like, excuse me, but I'm not going from, having a kid in the house to having my mom. I'm like, I've worked, since I was 16.
You made it.
Yeah, it's
you
like.
finally made it to the other side,
Yeah, I was not going to have the rug jerked out from underneath me.
Yeah.
So, long story short, I went in search of a memory care residence, and I love to tell the story that I found one, and when they told me that she could keep her dog, I basically threw the checkbook at them, like, here's money, take a deposit. I did not do any of the research, check licensing, Google reviews, state board complaints, or wherever. I don't even know where to check for those things. Fortunately, my gut instinct was right. She thrived in the memory care residence. She had friends she got into mischief with, all of which were named Diane. So it was Diane, other Diane, and other Diane. I don't know how they managed that one, but they did.
Yeah.
And, everything was fine. But when I went to visit with her, she literally wanted to just sit around and chat, which would be fine, except she asked me the same question literally every 2 minutes. And so she always asked me, so what have you been up to lately? And I would say, oh, well, it's Monday, so I went to the gym and did spin. These were in the old days when we used to go to the gym instead of to the garage.
Back in the day. Yeah. Right, of course.
And then she'd ask me again, and I'd say, oh, well, it's Monday. I went to Rotary. Oh, okay. My dad had been in Rotary for 45 years, so that was...
Great organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then she'd ask me a third time, and I'd say, well, it's Monday. I went to Rotary, and so spoke on blah, blah, blah topic. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And then she'd ask me again. So I'd be like, it's Monday. I came to visit you. Oh, really? Duh. I'm here sitting in front of you. Okay. And then she'd ask me again. I'd put the whole thing together. And now about 20 minutes had gone by. I'd run out of stuff to tell her. A lot of people said, well, just make stuff up. Well, I'm sorry. This is my mother. You don't lie to Mom. And it just felt wrong. So driving to the gym one morning, I was like, duh, I need to, I need to find a podcast on caregiving. There's podcasts on everything. Cheese making, funeral homes. So when I got home and looked on the computer, because I'm old and need glasses, I can't read it on my phone. There was one podcast in late 2017 on caregiving. And for better or worse, it was not my cup of tea. And so I decided, what the heck? I'll start my own. So I did.
Yeah. Now, is your mom still alive? You may have mentioned that.
No, my mom fell and broke her leg March 8th, 2020, and passed away March 31st, 2020, which was a blessing. It was a little shocking because she had just turned 77. I figured we had 2 or 3 years left based on the trajectory of her disease. And, you hear about somebody breaking a hip and that's the end. You don't hear about somebody breaking a leg and that being the end, but it was. And
it happens, yeah.
Yeah, well, she'd had Alzheimer's for pretty much 20 years, so it shouldn't have been too surprising, but the world was sort of coming undone at the same time. And I fully believe that she had a moment of clarity because I didn't have them do the surgery to repair the leg because anesthesia on somebody with advanced Alzheimer's is not a great idea. You do not know who they will be when they wake up. You could be inviting all kinds of problems. They could have a change of personality. I mean, it's just a complete crapshoot. Even the anesthesiologists who really don't want to acknowledge that kind of sort of acknowledged it. So she was pretty much bed-bound, wheelchair-bound, and then there was this virus thing going on, and the cost...
Called COVID?
Yeah. The cost for her care was going to go from $5,600 to $7,200. I am convinced 100% that she had a moment of clarity, and she said, I'm going to be stuck in a wheelchair or bed. I'm not going to be able to go out with my best friend, who that's what she thought of me as, and watch kids in the park because of this virus thing. And what the heck, $7,200? Absolutely not. So she died March 31st, and the rent was supposed to change on April 1st.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's wild.
How can you not think that there had to have been just, even if it was a nanosecond, she was just like, nope, done, out.
Well, and you know what's interesting about that statement is I think when somebody develops a disability, especially a cognitive disability, like we discredit everything. Like we don't discredit 80%, 90%, not even 99%. We discredit 100% of everything that they say and go through. And I think that's something that we should change because there is. I think that the brain still functions. It doesn't function as effectively as you would hope that it would, and obviously this is a real disease. But there are still. Your mom is still your mom in there, right? Like she wasn't a different person. She just didn't remember. But if you could maybe expand on that, was she a different person dealing with her once she had the late stages of her Alzheimer's versus maybe when she was in her early 60s or maybe late 50s, early 60s, late 50s?
Actually, no.
Okay.
Just thinking about it. It's interesting because, she always told anybody that she could, this is my best friend and I've known her forever, which always cracked me up because it's like, you think? Perhaps, how old am I down to the minutes and seconds? Yeah. And so she may have forgotten what our relationship was called, but she knew I was somebody that gave her joy. It took a lot of trial and error to figure out how to have a visit that wasn't her asking me the same question every 2 or 3 minutes, because that was not good for my brain. And, she was a mother and a grandmother, so watching children in the park was, an obvious good choice. I tried a lot of the other things they always say. Well, simplify the hobbies that they enjoyed. Well, my mom had done everything from sewing to painting to woodworking, probably forgetting things. So I looked for simple art projects that she could do, things that didn't require a lot of skill, which sounds terrible, but that's okay. I have a hobby that doesn't require a lot of skill either. So, so she was.
What do you do?
I actually make handmade greeting cards.
That's so cool.
It's so much fun, and I have
love that.
So tonight we moved to a new community that has a lot of groups and clubs and activities, and so I'm like, I need to find my people. My people are like creative and fun and don't necessarily want to drink for every activity. So I started my own club. We're doing that tonight, and it's been a blast.
Awesome.
I have my first gentleman coming tonight. That'll be interesting, but it doesn't require like a ton of skill. I mean, you can make a nice handmade greeting card pretty much out of the gate. A couple years in, you make them better. It's not like painting or photography that, takes some practice and same thing. So go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. You keep going.
She was like a version of my mother. And one of the funniest things I like to tell people is, one of the biggest challenges for me was she would say and do things that I was just like, if I had said those to you, if I had talked to you like that, you'd be like one of her favorite sayings was, you'd complain if you were hit with a new axe. Yeah, I would. Thank you very much. And so she would I don't want to say complain, but she would just kind of emote basically negative feelings, and it'd be like, it's not going to do me any good to say that to her. Keep it in.
Right. Yeah.
So it was kind of interesting because there was a flip-flop in a little bit of our relationship.
Fascinating. So I am curious, like early stages of this transition where you are fortunate because you had the means to be able to find a memory care facility. And I'm going to ask you something at the end of this question that I think is pretty important. But when you think back to the early days of caregiving, if you could share one piece of advice or encouragement with yourself, what would it be? And the question that I am most curious about is, what would you have done if you didn't have the means to put her in a memory care facility?
Probably killed myself.
I know, that's a big question. Well, it's a big question, but a lot of caregivers, especially early on, they need to know what to do, and the advice that you give is paramount. But also, like, if you ain't got the money, which a lot of people don't, then it's a long road, and it's a sad road, and it's a frustrating road. So we had a photography studio and 1 hour photo lab together, a family business. And the initial signs that something was wrong were really super easy to dismiss because nobody goes, oh my gosh, you must have Alzheimer's. I mean, I know people joke about, I got Alzheimer's and stuff, and those jokes kind of make me a little crazy because those people need a little bit of education, gentle education. Sure.
She would take orders from clients on the day before her day off with no directions, no due dates, no useful information whatsoever. Well, it's really easy to say, well, she got, the phone rang, she had to go to the bathroom, both, whatever, and just dismiss it. But it started happening more and more. And I noticed it happening more and more. So what I did, I actually became a helicopter caregiver, which is not a great thing, but I didn't know any better. So when she was basically shooting the breeze with a client and I could hear her, I would go out and say, oh, so what are we doing for Laura today? And that way I could insert myself into the conversation, figure out what the client wanted, and not have to make an embarrassing phone call later on and go, oh, my mom forgot to write down the directions. Can you tell me what you wanted? Which with some of the orders were like restoring old photos, not necessarily something you could describe over the phone. We had an incident one day where she did not recognize her own handwriting on an order. That was thrilling. And so I explained to her that I was becoming concerned, that she'd had these confusing moments, they were going from weekly to daily. And she looked at me and she said, well, I don't want to end up like my mother, and turned on her heel and stomped away. And I'm like, well, that's useful because, you're going to end up like your mother or I got to kill you. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not into murder. So, and it just became, just a low level of stress because I constantly had to worry about my responsibilities and what was she doing. And it's important in the early stages to give them as many tools as you can to maintain their independence, because it's kind of a lose it or use it. Did I say that right? Lose it or use it. Yeah, use it or lose it. There we go. I knew that didn't sound quite right. It's a use it or lose it kind of situation. They're going to lose those skills anyway, but it's kind of, your brain is a muscle, and it's, if you're not continually strengthening what skills you have, they're going to go faster. And trust me, you don't want them to go faster.
So how old was she whenever she started to have these daily occurrences where she was forgetting things?
And make me do math?
And, well, I'm just curious because, what I want to find out is from the time that you realize, okay, we have a problem, to the period of I have to take care of my mother full time because my father passed away. I'm curious to see how much time she was able to live with your father. And I'm assuming that he provided the majority of the care for her, right?
He did. So she was in her early 60s when they retired from that business in 2005.
Okay.
And no, I didn't do math. While you were talking, I used the calculator.
It's all good. It's all good.
People tell me I should do math in my head because it helps strengthen my brain. And I'm like, yes, but it causes severe stress, which is toxic to your brain. So, yeah, we don't go that route.
Yeah.
It was, when they retired, it was kind of hard because it was a bit of a relief because, oh, thank God, I don't have to deal with these two anymore. My dad had diabetes, was not good at watching his blood sugar. So he was a whole other thing to deal with. And she just became somebody we had to supervise a lot more. She would wait till the end of the day to get started on work, which I now recognize was quiet. Some of the employees were gone. There was less clients coming in. The phone was ringing less. So it was easier for her to sit down and go, okay, now I'm going to retouch these portraits or restore this.
Concentrate. Yeah.
But it was frustrating for me because I lived, about 40 minutes away. They literally lived 9/10 of a mile. So I'm like, excuse me, it's 5 o'clock. We close in an hour. Why are you starting work now? And she always told me, well, don't worry about it. You can go home. But I just never felt comfortable leaving her there alone, which is interesting because, we were in a safe suburb of San Francisco. I was like, I didn't worry about her physical safety. I'm not really sure what I worried about other than coming to work the next day.
Well, I mean, yeah, just something bad happening because she may have made a poor decision. She might have turned something on and forgot to turn it off, I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but it's a real thing, So honestly though, all joking aside, and it may very well not have been a joke, but what would you have done if you put yourself back at the very beginning where, okay, your mom's in your house, you're trying to find a memory care facility. How different would your life have been if you didn't have the means to put her in a memory care facility and you had to care for her? I'm assuming, you're working from home, so you're going to be the primary caregiver. You probably lean on your family a little bit. What?
Well, it would have been like most family caregivers in that position. It's just super stressful. I probably would have had to give up my photography business prior. I did do that in 2020 because, people think they can do good portraits with their iPhones, which you can if you know what you're doing. Most people don't know what they're doing. Sure. And regardless, even if you do, you still needed me. But anyway, so I probably would have had to do that because she would not have left us alone. My dogs hated her dog, so that would have been another whole total nightmare. One of the things that people don't do, and this is where my dad, I'm going to say screwed up, is, and this is the advice that I give people because this is what we should have done, is when you get a diagnosis or something's going wrong. So like in 2005, when they were deciding to retire, I should have said, okay, Dad, you need to make a list of all the daily chores that need to get done, then add to the weekly list, or add to the list the weekly stuff, the monthly stuff, and then the random appointments. And now you've got like this huge pile of stuff that has to happen just to maintain a household. And that kind of also is one of the reasons why I tell people, when you get to about 85, do you really want to have to worry about the yard, cooking, cleaning, laundry?
Right.
Like, really? You're
Right.
retired. Like, you may not have 15 years. My paternal grandmother lived to 103. So from 85 to 103 is quite a number of years, almost 20 years, I think. Math again.
Yeah.
So
We're going to get you good at math by the end of the show, though.
So you get, you need to take a step back and say, how do I want to live the rest of my life? And if you have to take care of somebody like my mom, so, in the earlier stages, my dad was doing it, you need to put a care team in place. And you need to ask yourself, what will happen if I'm incapacitated, I end up in the hospital, or God forbid I die first? We never had that conversation with my dad, which still is frustrating, and it's been almost 7 years.
Why? I mean, why do you think that people don't have that conversation or do that planning? What is it?
I think a lot of it is fear. Okay. What if my dad had said to me, well, I'm sure you'll take your mother in, right? And I'd be like, no. That's not really a great way to start a conversation. And, and it's one of those things you have to start the conversations early on so that somebody can be like, oh, yeah, we do need to discuss this. And what if she doesn't have the money? And trust me, I worried about her running out of money. My husband's the money guy. We rented out her home to pay for the memory care. So between the rent, Social Security, that covered almost all of it. And then they had investments, and the financial planner put about $1,500 a month in the trustee bank account, which covered everything else, doctor appointments, whatever,
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but I realized, well, let me take a step back. We were going to just sell her home, which was paid for. My husband's in real estate and property management, and it was a friend who is a CPA who said, wait a minute. Your mother-in-law is not that old. You might want to think about renting out her home so you don't run out of money. And my husband's like, yeah, duh. So this is why you need to have these conversations early. This is why you need to figure out who can do other things for you so that you can be the hands-on person with your loved one. Because many people, if situation was reversed and we were having a caregiver take care of my dad, I'm sure most of your caregivers are female. And if we needed help with getting him showered, you don't necessarily want some strange woman in there at the shower with you. Or on the flip side of the coin, maybe you do, and now you've got a whole other problem.
It's a very interesting industry. I can put it like that.
That is true.
So in your experience, what are the easiest and most effective ways that individuals with Alzheimer's can maintain their independence and their quality of life?
Basically, you want to simplify things in the home so that decision-making is possible. So one of the things, like my mom literally had 2 closets. The closet that was in my childhood bedroom, which had 2 rods, and then her closet, which had to be like 8 feet wide. It was huge. Also 2 rods. So that amount of clothing for a woman that didn't work and didn't go on cruises or to fancy balls, or I don't know why anybody needs that many clothes. And, you find that they wear the same thing over and over and over, because when you open the closet and you've got 50 shirts and 20 pairs of pants and a few dresses, it's just like, tilt, can't make it's decision overload. Sure. And the other thing also is, a lot of people think, well, my mom's not eating very well. I don't know why she can't just, quote, make a sandwich. Have you ever stopped and thought about how many steps are involved in just making a sandwich? There's what bread, what meat, what condiments. You got to cut it. You're going to toast the bread. I mean, there's 20 different questions just for a sandwich. So, simplifying everything that you can so that they can make choices. You want to make sure that they have the ability, if they need aids for getting in and out of chairs or walking, or, they need a seat in the shower. You need to make sure that things are functional so that they can continue to do the things they need to do. One, they want to, and you need them to, because, if you're taking care of a spouse, it's physically exhausting. I don't know how people in their 80s take care of somebody with Alzheimer's. I really don't. It wore me out.
Well, and I mean, on that note, though, how can we better understand Alzheimer's as a disease and kind of start demystifying the parts that, make it seem so scary?
Well, first off, this is another bit of advice that I give people, and I didn't finish the other advice, so we'll have to come back to that. I go on tangents.
Okay. No, it's okay. It's okay, please.
We need to understand what the disease is and what the progression is. Most people think that somebody with Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia, and they don't realize that dementia is an umbrella term or a symptom. It's not actually a diagnosis. So just knowing that's kind of helpful. Most people don't understand that in the very late stages of Alzheimer's, your brain forgets to tell your legs how to walk. Poof, can happen overnight. You forget, you don't style your hair the same way anymore because you don't remember how. It's like that door to those skills is closed, and there's not any way of getting back around. There's no window to get into those skills. Most people just think it's memory loss, and most of them think it's short-term memory loss. Like, they don't remember your name, they don't remember what they had for breakfast, but maybe if I ask them questions, do you remember me? What did we have for breakfast today? That's a great way to start a fight, because no, they don't remember you. And they don't remember what they had for breakfast, and you're challenging them, and you're going to make them angry, and then it's going to be all bad.
Frustrated, yeah.
But I have a caregiver friend who's been taking care of her mom for 8 years. She's only 36. And a year ago, her mom had a fall, was obviously afraid to continue walking. They did some medical testing to see if there was something wrong. And so they didn't really start on physical therapy until it was too late. And basically, her brain literally forgot how to walk. There's nothing wrong with her legs. I mean, after a year, they're probably a little atrophied at this point, I'm assuming, but a year ago, she physically could walk, but her brain could not tell her legs how to walk. And I think that always comes as a surprise to people. It came as a surprise to her, but you're so close to caring. You're trying to fix everything, make everything as good as possible. So naturally, mom's having trouble walking. Let's get a diagnosis. Let's get some physical therapy. Let's get this fixed. Well, you can't fix it. She pivoted pretty quickly once that became obvious, but a lot of people just fight it. It's like you can't fix them.
But as a society, I guess, do we understand Alzheimer's disease? Like, in your opinion, right? Like they literally, and this is going to go into my next question, but they literally have no idea what it is. It's just essentially, in the grand scheme of things, if you look at it from a popular media perspective, it's forgetfulness. That's it. But they don't understand the other symptoms of, like you said, the blanket term of dementia. They don't understand what causes it. They don't understand, honestly, how to treat it. And that's where I want to go to next, is I want to talk about the treatments that are currently available for Alzheimer's disease. As a caregiver and as an advocate, what are your thoughts on the options that we have?
Well, they're not enough. And I
do they work?
Well, there aren't treatments. They do have a new drug. It was called lecanemab. Don't know why they got to give them names you can almost not pronounce. Now,
it's like Aduhelm.
Aduhelm was the first one, and it was all. I guess the FDA approval process was a little bit rushed. There was some controversy as to whether it actually helped people in the very early stages of Alzheimer's. So unfortunately, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known as CMS, decided we're not going to cover this drug or any of the other drugs in this same vein. So Aduhelm, lecanemab are basically like flavors of ice cream, if that's a good analogy. I'm going to make myself hungry.
Well, they're so expensive. Aduhelm is, if I'm not mistaken, it's $56,000 a year to take it.
Which
is
has
wild.
to be done very early on. And it's very difficult to get diagnosed very early on because most doctors don't know, like most general physicians get 4 hours of dementia training in their entire 8 years of medical school. 4 hours.
Wow.
I'm not even trying to do that math. That's not possible. And that's
4
it.
hours?
And I'm not sure they're required. Don't quote me on that part. Let's just assume the 4 hours is the minimum requirement.
Statistically, though, how many people have Alzheimer's in the United States? Do you know that number?
Yes, it's in the...
Do you have a ballpark?
Yeah, I think it's like 6 or 7 million and growing rapidly.
Okay. So, yeah. So when you say growing rapidly, because it's interesting. I talked to somebody, I think 3 or 4 shows ago. She was from San Francisco, and she was talking about we were talking about specifically about dementia, and she educated me a lot on being in the industry. You'd think you'd know everything, at least have a general understanding of it. And she was like, no, you're so wrong. And I was like, God, I feel like an idiot. But anyway, so she was saying that that Aduhelm doesn't work for, like, it may work in the beginning, but it doesn't work, obviously, once you have the disease and it's progressed. She mentioned, though, psychedelics for Alzheimer's treatment. And I know that's a very new and controversial aspect. But she said one of the reasons why we have yet to devote the full scope of resources to Alzheimer's is because not enough people have it. Now, between 6 and 7 million people is a lot. But when you say growing rapidly, like, how fast is it growing?
Somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's every minute of every day.
Wow.
And it may have sped up. That was the last time I heard that statistic, which I think was pre-COVID, but they're still kicking that one around, so maybe it hasn't sped up since 2019. I could look it up, but... And
on top of that, it's difficult to get a diagnosis. So that means that you have to be you have to be showing significant symptoms of Alzheimer's or dementia to actually get a qualified diagnosis from a physician. So how many people are walking around that haven't been diagnosed?
Oh, exactly. I think that number is woefully low. There's they claim, this is from the Alzheimer's Association, that there's almost 17 million family caregivers taking care of somebody specifically with Alzheimer's. So this is not even all forms of dementia, or, Parkinson's disease can also cause a dementia. And that's definitely an undercount, because I didn't consider myself a caregiver because my mom lived in memory care. So I was just, the daughter, until I went to my first...
Yeah, you were the friend.
And so when I went to my first Alzheimer's support group, the facilitator there said, welcome. Even if your loved one is in memory care, you are still a caregiver. And I thought, maybe I am. And so if I did not think of myself as a caregiver after dealing with her, so that was a dozen years for sure that I knew she was, probably it was actually longer, maybe 15 years. If I didn't in those 15 years think of myself as a caregiver, how many other people don't? How many spouses, especially men, it's just, this is my wife, I'm taking care of her, that's what I'm supposed to do, period. Why do I got to put a label on it? Well, so for sure that that's an undercount. And back to the diagnosis, because Alzheimer's obviously affects the brain and dementias affect the brain, and all of us are different, and the disease affects different parts of the brain, it's a total crapshoot as to what the heck is going on. Some people, there's a gal, she's on Twitter, her name is Janice Swink, and she's really an excellent person to follow. She was originally diagnosed with frontal temporal dementia, which has a lot to do with more behavioral changes than memory issues.
Right.
But now she's also been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she is a huge advocate. And just recently, like in the last week or so, her husband has started making videos of some of her daily interactions. They'll go early to grocery stores so she can get some exercise, a little socialization.
Sure.
She really, really shares what living in her brain is like. And more people need to do it. When I started my podcast, videos like that, you would have gotten flamed online big time. But now, because there's so many other younger millennial caregivers, man, they share everything. So, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Well,
everybody's different. And so it makes it very difficult.
right.
I'm assuming, cancers kind of work the same way, whether it's brain, a tumor or blood, or, thankfully the only cancers I've ever had to deal with are in my golden retrievers, which is that's a whole other podcast.
Knock on wood. Yeah.
So it's very difficult to know what's going on. A patient and their spouse, or maybe their adult kid comes in and says, doctor, she's doing all these weird things and blah, blah, blah. And the doctor's like, so she forgot what she had for breakfast. So she can't remember what your name is half the time.
Well, I'll tell you, again, another person that I had an interview with, I think you're going to really enjoy this. They bring up the exact same thing about, okay, so we'll use cancer and Alzheimer's as an analogy. So when somebody gets cancer, like the entire world rallies around them. Like, hey, we're going to fix this. And it's usually because cancer can affect you at any time of your life. It can affect you when you're just born up until you're, 120 years old, the entire span of your life. But Alzheimer's typically affects you later in life. Now, there are the rare cases where you have very early onset Alzheimer's, but typically it affects you after you're 65, 70. So how much do you think ageism plays into the lack of, and again, this may just be like a brief snippet and not enough time for a extreme explanation, but how much do you think ageism plays into doctors and the medical community and society as a whole, just saying it's just all part of the aging process, can't do anything about it?
Probably a lot. And unfortunately, because there's no cure, there's no prevention, and there's no treatments, it's really simple to be like, oh, well, bye. And that's pretty much what happens to a family. You get a diagnosis of, any form of dementia, but in our case, Alzheimer's. And it's like, here's a pamphlet to the Alzheimer's Association. Make an appointment for another 6 months. Bye. It's like nothing. It's horrifying. And they just... Like, my mom had to go for a blood test, and thankfully the lobby of the place was empty. Well, there was one guy sitting there reading on his iPad. He must have been waiting for somebody. So I lean over the counter. I explain to the younger technician, this is my mom, blah, 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 kind of check her in. I said, she has advanced Alzheimer's, so you're going to have to ask her one question at a time, and you're going to have to say it slowly. So we get into the blood draw room. The gal immediately goes, can you give me your name and date of birth? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I barely understood that. And I just looked at her and I said, what about advanced Alzheimer's did you not get? And it's just like a knee-jerk reaction. Like somehow, but my mother was going to morph into somebody else from the front to the 15 feet to the next room. It's like so frustrating. So there needs to be a huge amount of education as to what this disease does to people. Because that lack of knowledge makes it very difficult to support people like me and all the people who are currently caring for a loved one. It's hard to support them because you don't understand what's going on, and so you don't really know what to do for them, and so you're like, yeah, I'm out.
Well, and I'm assuming that a lot of the information and a lot of the resources that you found happened when you identified or found or built a community of people that were going through similar things, how you started your podcast, things like that. So what's the most effective way to start finding and building the support system that you need as a caregiver?
I would start in your community, and this is going to circle
Okay.
right back to that advice I didn't finish. So good job on you. So when you get this
Thank you.
diagnosis
Appreciate
and
that.
you realize, holy crap, my whole life has just been turned upside down, but not 100% just yet, it's going to get worse. You make this list of chores that you have to do, daily, weekly, monthly, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. Then you make a second list of everybody you know, family, friends, neighbors, church group, distant family members. They don't even have to live in the same town. And you make a list of all of them. Then write down what skill you think these people could help you with. You know, is the grandson really good at tech support? And, you know, you're in your 80s and you can't figure out your new phone or the remote for the TVs because those are getting complicated. You know,
Yeah.
and like, if you put my name on the list, you aren't going to say, okay, well, we're going to have Jen call the banks and the insurance companies because Jen don't do that. I cannot stand that. That stresses me out
Right.
just thinking about it. But you need meals. You need companionship. You want me to take the dog and your loved one for a walk, maybe go to the dog park. I can handle all that. Don't ask me to call the insurance companies. And so when you have this
Right.
list, you know, you can kind of maybe keep it in a cheat sheet in your pocket, or, you know, if you're like me, you can probably keep it in your memory. And somebody comes up to you and says, oh my gosh, I just heard about your mom. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Boom, you have an answer. You're not going to say, oh no, it's okay, thank you. Because you know you don't mean that. You know, you're screaming
Right.
inside your head going, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I'm terrified, but I can't let my loved one know. And I don't have any answers. And, you know, no, you have an answer. And because you're saying, hey, Jen, could you, you know, maybe once a week take mom.
Sorry, it's my cat.
Yeah, can you take the cat out for us? It's okay.
Sorry about that.
I don't know if you can hear mine. One of mine's been upstairs barking, and I know on my end
It's
it doesn't
okay.
pick up, but with your recording software it might. But I took my mom and 3 golden retrievers to the dog park somewhat regularly, which is kind of insane. But she loved it, and they loved it.
It's impressive.
And yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge, but you know, at the end, it was like when we had a really good afternoon at the dog park. She was better. I was good. The dogs were happy. And you know what?
Yeah.
If I was doing that for, say, you got maybe an hour, 2 hours where you can take a nap, answer bills, watch TV, read a book, you know, go jogging to get rid of some of the stress, whatever it is you need to do. You know, you're not asking me to do something that's outside my comfort zone or something that's going to make me feel like now I'm getting sucked in. Sure, I could take the dogs and your mom to the dog park once a week.
Yeah. Can I ask you kind of it might be somewhat of a complicated question, but one of the things that I personally feel like is lacking in the entire long-term care system as a whole is the things that you're talking about sound like exactly what should happen. You should find a community. You should put a list of people together. You should know your limitations as a caregiver. You should ask for help when necessary. Like all of these things, all of them make sense. There's no cure, so it's not like you're going to, you know, stumble across, you know, the day where the miracle has finally happened, right? So you're in it for the long haul. Don't you think that as a country we should try and devote more resources to helping families that are literally like having to put their entire life, careers, motivations, dreams, all on hold? Because at the end of the day, they truly and wholeheartedly love this person and they're willing to do that for them. But like, gosh, man, like, why not throw them a bone and just say, well, you know what? Instead of spending money on X, Y, and Z, maybe we could develop a long-term care fund so families have the resources. So if they can't work, they at least have some type of money to help pay their bills and put food on the table, because a lot of times things are very tight.
Well, here's a good story that leads right into my answer. And I hope you're ready for the soapbox because you're getting it You went there.
Please. I want
So
it. I like the soapbox.
Maternal grandmother had vascular dementia, possibly mixed dementias. I really one of these days got to figure out what the absolute end of vascular dementia looks like, because it looked the same as with my mom. And my aunt, because my grandmother just had Social Security, they put her in I don't know what kind of home it was. And it was really bad. So my aunt took her out. My aunt took care of her mom in her home, living on my grandmother's Social Security till my grandmother died. My aunt is still alive.
Wow.
She must be, hang on a second, she must be like 72. She was 11 years younger than my mom. My mom would have been 80. So yeah, I think they're about 72, 73.
And she doesn't have dementia. No,
she has other mental health struggles. She's a recovering alcoholic. She's had a tough life.
Okay.
But she's on subsidized housing and welfare.
Okay.
So that all comes out of, our taxpayer pockets. I'm not really sure why the heck my mother's family decided that was a smart move. It was probably frustration and lack of options. But I fully believe that because family caregivers, and you can look this up, the Alzheimer's Association's website is alz.org. And you can go to their facts and figures page. But family caregivers essentially donate almost $1 trillion in care, free health care a year. And until corporations in this capitalistic society realize that people that have to retire early, go from full-time to part-time, or leave the workforce, how that is already in 2023 affecting their bottom line. Like, we have a worker shortage.
Oh, yeah.
You have a worker shortage.
Because we don't have, we don't, and it's a plethora of things, and it's all around, it's based around human services.
So until the government, but more appropriately corporations, realize that this is basically a hole in their bottom line, and money is just leaking out because they're losing, institutional not awareness, but you can tell I'm not a corporate person. The built-in
well, they're losing productivity,
but institutional knowledge, that's the word I was looking for. Because when you have somebody that's maybe been in the workforce, so I've been in the workforce 40 years, it's terrifying. And if I was in my 70s, that'd make me in the workforce 50 or almost 60 years. That person's got a lot of value. And when they have to step back or retire early, now they're not contributing to their own retirement financial balance sheet, and they're not they're not contributing to the corporation anymore. I mean, it's basically we're all losing because we're not supporting family caregivers.
Right.
The biggest problem is, who in their right mind would take over the nearly $1 trillion of free health care we provide?
Well, and I'm not going to go in the weeds, but I mean, I think the easy answer to that question is that the federal government doesn't want to create another line item of mandatory spending like they did with Medicare and Social Security, because that is a behemoth of a funding package, and they've
been fighting about it for 50 years.
They know that. Exactly. Yeah. They've been fighting about it for 50 years, but you know what? It's helped a lot of people along the way, even though they fight. I'll do this. I'll let them fight about it all they want. They can keep fighting, but at least we'll have it in place, And so, a lot of people would get support. Moving on. I want to talk about your podcast. Before we wrap up, tell us about Fading Memories podcast, what listeners can expect, and who you made it for.
I made it for people like me. I like to read, but you can only read books on Alzheimer's, dementia, caregiving for so long before you're they're usually fairly heavy. And yes, there's a lot of good information, and more books are coming out, more and more podcasts have come out. But you know what? If you're taking care of somebody in your home, you don't have time to sit there and read these books. I didn't, and my mom didn't live with me. And it's very frustrating when you devote the time to educate yourself, and that education doesn't really help. Like, I was trying to find ways of engaging with my mom that were meaningful and positive and joyful, because my goal was to give her as much quality of life and joy as possible without elongating dying from Alzheimer's. So like straddling the train tracks there. So when I started my podcast, my thought process was, if you're listening to a podcast while you're taking care of the 15 other chores, and a lot of people told me, I don't know why you don't just listen to a podcast with like one earbud in when you're dealing with your mom. I'm like, again, it was my mother. That's rude,
Right. Yeah.
I kept thinking about it, and I never ever pulled that trigger. But, people are busy, and listening to podcasts, two things. One, you can get some information, but I just recently read an article where very avid podcast listeners actually get a sense of belonging and less loneliness, which is also a very big problem for caregivers, because and I got to remember all these words. You develop I think it's a parasocial, one-sided relationship. So when you listen to me every week, you might think you know me. You probably know a lot about my life because I do talk about my dogs and hubby, and you know enough that you feel like you know me, even though you've never met me. And
I feel like I know you.
I like to talk. It's like one of the reasons my mom liked to shoot the breeze. It's sort of genetic, I suppose. But my goal was to provide a positive conversational style podcast, because that's what I like to listen to, where you talk to people who have been there or are there and have something to share, or maybe just talk about their story. You hear about Jessica, who is the gal I talked about, whose mom's brain basically forgot how to walk. And, you hear her story and you think, oh, okay, I can relate, or man, I'm really glad I've never had those experiences, or I haven't had those experiences, but now I'm glad that I know that could be coming. It's just a very easy and positive way to get information, validation, and maybe feel a little less lonely.
I love that. So we always like to end the show with a call to action. What can we do to start creating a world that is more accepting and accessible to those with Alzheimer's disease?
I would think first you need to educate yourself as to what a cognitive disease is like, because this kind of also encompasses people living with autism. Anybody who's neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like the first.
Divergent, I think.
As soon as it hit my brain, it didn't sound quite right, but they're different. It doesn't mean they're wrong. And when you realize they see the world, they live in the world differently than you, okay, fine. It doesn't make them bad, you bad. It's different. Chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream. It's all good. And once we understand, like I had a photography client whose son is severely autistic. And when I learned more about his experiences, the next time you go to a grocery store and you see what you think is a teenager throwing a temper tantrum, you don't automatically assume, what a terrible parent, and you just go right down the negative path. You realize, oh, that person might have autism. I'm not going to stare.
Mm-hmm.
Let me assess the situation, see if there's something, can I help? Maybe, pick up the groceries that might have got knocked on the floor or something. And then if you can't assist, just walk away, let them deal with it. Don't be judgmental. We got to all stop being so judgmental. My mom and I had an experience, mostly me. She didn't realize it happened. We'd been at the library watching children. That's what we did. And as we left, there was two women with like vertical carts with religious pamphlets. And they were, trying to share their passion for their religion, which is fine. And my mom made a really odd, off-the-cuff comment to the gal. And this was the younger of the two women. And she looked at me like, huh? What the heck? And she totally was completely confused. And you could tell that her brain was scrambling around trying to make sense of what my mom had said. Sure. And I just turned my back so my mom was behind me. And I said, she has Alzheimer's. And then the gal was like, okay. I'm not sure she really understood, but at least now she had an explanation for why this older woman was a little bit off. And maybe she went and looked up Alzheimer's on Google, or, she asked somebody like, hey, have you ever known anybody that has Alzheimer's? And it just would have been way less awkward for me and her. Like I said, my mom was blissfully unaware of the little situation she created. And we need, and then we can also have things like, Like, I took my mom to Target one day, and we just think of Target as kind of a fun place to go. Take somebody that doesn't have good cognitive awareness. It's overwhelming. You got kids screaming, you got stuff everywhere, bright lights, and it's just like crazy. So once we understand how their brain is functioning or not functioning, then we can be a little bit more sensitive to maybe some of the changes we need to make in our world to make it easier for them to navigate. And I really think one of these days I'm going to go to Canada again and check out, they've got dementia villages where there's a dementia village outside Vancouver where I think it's like 6 homes. It's a number of homes, and it's up against a forest, and there's a fence in the back, so you can't wander away into the forest and get lost and have bad things happen.
Right.
But you have independence because it's designed for you. So it's designed for companionship and maintaining your independence as much as possible, but also keeping you safe. You know, like a lot of people, you know, we were talking about, most of us say, I want to live in my home until I die, but we don't think about how that's not necessarily doable. You know, I got stairs down to my office, so hopefully, you know, I don't ever have a problem with the stairs, because then the whole bottom half of my house is going to be a problem.
Well, you can put in a stair lift.
But, you know, we got a big step into the shower. And kitchens, like go into your kitchen, and if you don't know where something is, how hard is it to find it? We just moved 14 months ago, so there's times when it's like, where did we put that again? And I got to do a video on why people don't eat, because you walk into a kitchen, you don't have just food just laying buffet style on the counter. You got to go find it.
Right.
And you might not think about looking in the behind the pantry door, or, you know, you might think about going in the fridge, but then you look in there and that's a whole confusion, and you're like, never mind, I'm going to, that looks like too much work. We just really need to,
Well, Jennifer,
we need to understand how the disease affects the brain so that we can understand the changes we need to make it easier for those living with a dementia disease, for those caring for somebody with a dementia disease, and then everybody will be better.